Wars is part of the Rippin Podcast Network. Today on Cardboard Wars, we explore the legendary career of Honus Wagner, journey through Wagner's storied baseball life, his unparalleled skills, and the legacy of his rare T206 card that reshaped sports memorabilia. Gain insights into the economic significance, historical controversies, and unmatched value of this iconic collectible. So sit back and enjoy this episode of Cardboard Wars.
It's 1897. You're a scout in Louisville, a small National League franchise that's just trying to survive in a league that is brutal, underfunded, and brutally competitive. Someone hands you a tip about a kid playing semi-pro ball in one of the industrial towns of Western Pennsylvania. So you pack up and you go watch him.
And what you see doesn't make sense. He's built all wrong. Barrel-chested, bow-legged, arms so long, they hang almost to his knees. Sounds like one of my co-hosts today. He looks more like a stevedore than a ball player. He's never going to survive formal coaching, and there's no way he's getting drafted.
Except he hits .338 in his first full professional season, then .299, then .381, then .353. And gentlemen, he doesn't stop. For the next 20 years, he doesn't stop.
His name was Johannes Peter Wagner, known to every fan in America as Honus, and known to every opponent in the National League as the Flying Dutchman. And by the time he was done, Ty Cobb, the most competitive man who ever played the game, said that Honus Wagner was the greatest player that he'd ever seen.
By the way, it's pretty crazy that they named a guy after a hamburger from In-N-Out. That's amazing.
Exactly. Anyways, what happened there. Exactly.
It's obviously what happened, right? There's no other possible answer to that. Anyways, Ty Cobb saying that is no small statement, because Cobb didn't say that about anybody else, right? He didn't say that about Cy Young, not about Christy Mathewson, not about Walter Johnson. He said that about Wagner, about Honus Wagner.
And today we're going to let you guys know why. Not just the stats, but the story behind those stats. Where did this guy come from? How did he build what he built? And maybe more than anything, what did it actually cost him?
And why, Bob, and why, Kevin, do we do this? Because, ladies and gentlemen, this is Cardboard Wars. We talk about players, the teams they play on, and the cards that honored them across all sports. And even every once in a while, you never know, we might throw in a TCG episode. Let's get to the point. Let's go back in time to Carnegie, Pennsylvania, February 24th, 1874. A factory in a mining settlement outside of Pittsburgh that would later be renamed Carnegie, previously the Charters Township. It was named after a steel baron who would come to define it. This is not a picturesque origin story. There's no rolling fields or sandlots. There is coal dust and the sound of heavy equipment.
Honus Wagner's father, Peter Wagner, was a German immigrant who worked in the mines. His mother, Karen Wolf, had 9 children. Honus, again, short for Johannes, he was the 4th. The family spoke German at home, and he would carry a thick Pittsburgh German accent his entire life.
Kevin, here's what a lot of people probably miss about that type of a background, right? Growing up around those mines. And yeah, it made him physically strong. Like the guy had arms like an ox, right? But it also made him practically minded. Like in the mines, like if you slip or mess up, like you don't get a second chance. You read those situations, you move efficiently. You do not make avoidable mistakes.
By 12 years old, Honus, had already worked alongside his brothers in the mines. Imagine that, guys. We were working in the strawberry fields and bucking hay. I don't know what your worst horrible first job was, but that was mine. There was no expectation that he would do anything else. No baseball academy, no tryout system, no pipeline into professional sports. If someone had told Peter Wagner that his bow-legged son would one day be the highest paid player in the National League, he probably would have thought that they were mocking him.
But what Wagner had instead of a formal development track was something arguably even more durable. An extraordinary instinct for physical competition, developed in an environment, to Bob's point earlier, with no safety net. He played town ball like the informal predecessor to organized baseball. He played it with the intensity of somebody that had nothing to lose.
And physically, he was like genuinely unusual, a unicorn, if you will. He was 5'11", weighed around 200 pounds, which for that time was big, Kevin. Like 5'11", 200 pounds of muscle wasn't normal back then. But when the opponents talked about him, they always talked about his hands. His big hands meant he had a mean grip. And a mean grip, he could probably throw a baseball like a few other guys couldn't.
He had one other thing working for him. An older brother named Al, who had already found his way into organized baseball. Al introduced Honus to the right people, and in 1895, Honus signed his first professional contract in Ohio for kind of an interstate club league for $35 a month. $35 back then, not a lot. And that's where one of the greatest careers in baseball begins. Not with a tryout, not with a signing bonus, but with just the $35 in minor league in a small city that most of us had never heard of.
But Ben, he didn't stay there long because Honus hit 402 in Ohio. In the following season, he played in Paterson, New Jersey, where he hit 349. By the summer of 1896, scouts from multiple National League teams had started to pay attention to Honus. He was 22 years old, and he hadn't yet played a single inning at the top level, but he was getting the attention.
The Louisville Colonels got there first, gentlemen. They signed him ahead of the 1897 season, and he made his major league debut that April. Now, here's the context that matters, okay? Louisville was not a powerhouse. They were a franchise trying to just make it, like to stay solvent. They were on the verge of not being able to roll that team out anymore. And in a 12-team National League that was consistently at risk of teams falling apart or going bankrupt, he walked really into chaos, you guys.
And yet his numbers were immediately remarkable. He hit 338 his rookie year. In his second season, he hit 299, which looks ordinary until you understand what the dead ball era actually meant.
Yeah, let's explain that because this context is critical. The dead ball era, roughly 1900 through 1919, was defined by a baseball that was pitched until it was soft and misshapen.
That's crazy.
Rarely replaced. I mean, you think about that. You think about how many balls get tossed into the crowd, tossed over to the ball boy. Like, balls are getting replaced. It seems like every other pitch, right? And that just wasn't like they were just using one ball until they could no longer play with it. Home runs were almost irrelevant. Like, they just didn't do it. You know, you had pitchers doctoring the ball back then. Fields were uneven. Games were won by like a run or two.
So in an environment like that, somebody batting 338 wasn't just good. Like he was exceptional. Every hit, Kevin, earned. There's no juiced ball, Ben. This is not, there's no launch angle optimization or there wasn't relief pitchers shuffling in. Like you were facing the best guy the whole time. You're hitting a discolored baseball that a pitcher's been roughing up, Kevin, for 4 innings. Like, there's no question back in those days, those guys were carrying, like, the scuffing boards in their pocket, and they were scuffing the baseball so they could get that extra spin on it. The guy probably had Vaseline on the underside of his baseball cap, right? Like this was not a hitter's era.
Wagner was already showing his versatility that was almost unheard of. In his Louisville years, he played outfield. He played third base. He played first base and second base. Wherever the Colonels needed him, he wasn't a shortstop yet, but he was a weapon that needed a position.
Yeah, and as you might have been able to predict already, that Louisville franchise folded in 1899 when the National League contracted from 12 teams down to 8. So the league ownership structure allowed the powerful clubs to buy the weaker ones and kind of pick over their rosters, right? So Barney Dreyfuss, who owned the Louisville Colonels, and when the contraction came, he negotiated something that actually changed baseball history.
Dreyfuss purchased a controlling stake in the Pittsburgh Pirates, gentlemen. I got my Pittsburgh Pirates hat on, by the way, here. I don't know if you guys caught that for this Honus Wagner episode. But he was able to buy the Pirates, and then he transferred 14 of his best Louisville players to Pittsburgh, including himself as the owner. He essentially moved his franchise upstream along the Ohio River, and of course, in that group of 14 was Honus Wagner.
Dreyfuss knew exactly what he had. He called Wagner the best player in baseball before Wagner had even put on a Pirates uniform. And in 1900, the first full season in Pittsburgh, Wagner validated that confidence by winning the National League batting title with the .381 average. What happened next in Pittsburgh was not a gradual ascent. It was an immediate streak. Wagner won the battling title in 1900, 1901, 1902, and 1903. 4 straight years, he would go on to win 8 total in his career, finishing his career with a .328 lifetime average across 2,794 games.
Let's take a look at those stats like in a complete picture. He had 3,420 hits. He stole 722 bases, 101 home runs. Doesn't sound like a lot, but again, this is the dead ball era. There wasn't a whole lot of home runs being hit. So when you had a double-digit home run season, like, you were exceptional. So he was putting up massive numbers, a career on base plus slugging percentage that just really couldn't even be fully appreciated until the nerds, the sabermeticians got a hold of the data almost 100 years later.
Here's something worth focusing on, though, you guys. The numbers alone don't capture like what Wagner did. So he eventually was moved to shortstop, and he totally transformed that position. Like, up until that point, shortstops in the early 1900s were primarily a defensive role. Like, a lot of times they were the 9th guy on the roster. Like, they were there to stop runs, but that wasn't what Honus Wagner ended up doing. He ended up he made all the plays, Kevin. Like, every play out there, and he had those long arms, so he was great in the gaps as a shortstop. So he transformed defensively what the shortstop was, but he also hit cleanup. And in those days, shortstops didn't hit cleanup.
His range at shortstop was, by every contemporary account, extraordinary. His hands were so large that he would field grounders in a kind of scoop that included dirt, grass, and anything else nearby, and then fire it right off to first. Opponents said getting a hit through the left side felt impossible. Teammates said watching him in the field was like watching a man who had been given an unfair advantage.
Yeah, this may not surprise you, but the Pittsburgh Pirates won 3 straight National League pennants from 1901 to 1903, largely on the strength of Wagner's bat, combined with a dominant pitching staff led by Deacon Philippi. And by 1903, they also brought in the first modern World Series, a 9-game showdown, guys, against the Boston Americans. That sounds like another episode altogether, maybe for a later date.
Unfortunately, though, he struggled a little bit. Honus hit .222 in that series, which is one of those inconvenient facts that good sports storytelling sometimes glosses over. But Boston won 5-3. Wagner's errors and weak hitting in key moments were real, and he knew it. By multiple accounts, you guys, though, that series haunted him for years.
But what happened in 1909 is the answer to 1903. The Pittsburgh Pirates returned to the World Series, this time against the Detroit Tigers, the team of Ty Cobb. This was framed, even at the time, as the greatest player in American League against the greatest player in the National League. The sport had never quite seen two players coming into a game to collide like this.
Yeah, Wagner was 35 years old by this time. Cobb was only 22. But Wagner hit .333 in that series, had 6 RBIs, while Cobb, on the other end, only hit .231. Pittsburgh won this series 4-3. Wagner had his championship, and he had the head-to-head matchup against the man who would eventually claim the title that Wagner would go on to hold for years.
There's a story from that game, you guys, and it's probably embellished a little bit anyway in the way that I'm going to share it with you guys, but there's a story that Cobb on first base shouts down to Wagner, the shortstop, that I'm going to steal on the next pitch. And so sure enough, next pitch, Ty Cobb takes off, the throw goes down to second base, and Wagner fields that throw and swipes it across the bag so violently that he hits Cobb in the face with his glove and splits Ty Cobb's lip open. Whether or not it happened exactly that way, it captures kind of the essence of how those two guys played baseball at the turn of the century, which was everything laid out on the field.
Yeah, they definitely played all out. And Wagner continued to play until 1917. He retired at 43 years old. By that point, he had been the face of Pittsburgh baseball for nearly 2 decades, earning a peak salary of around $10,000 per year, making him one of the highest paid players in the National League at his peak. Barney Dreyfuss paid him because he was worth more than the market could even express. Well, let's talk now a little bit about some of Honus Wagner's contemporaries and what they actually said about him. Because in the absence of these advanced metrics, information and thoughts from our peers is probably the closest thing that we have to understanding really what the truth was.
Yeah, Ty Cobb said, and this is documented, by the way, that Wagner was the greatest ball player he'd ever seen. And Ty Cobb, if you know, there's been so many stories about Cobb himself, questions about some of those, but Cobb, one thing that's not questionable is he was deeply competitive, and he was famously reluctant to give out credit to any rival, anybody that he played against. But he put Wagner above himself. Like, that's not modesty. That's one elite competitor recognizing a peer that he knew he couldn't surpass.
John McGraw, the hard-edge manager of the New York Giants, a man who rarely gave anything away, said Wagner was in a class by himself. Frank Chance of the Cubs, Christy Mathewson, Cy Young, every single major figure of the era said roughly the same thing, guys. The consensus was not polite applause. It was a genuine acknowledgement that this guy could not be matched.
What is striking about the descriptions is how consistently they emphasized the completeness of the player. Nobody said Wagner was the best hitter. Nobody said he was the best fielder, the best base runner. They said just flat out, he was the best player because he was great at everything simultaneously, and because he did it without ever appearing to chase the recognition.
Yeah, and his relationship with Pittsburgh was really unique for the era. He actually turned down more money from other clubs, reportedly including offers from like the Eastern League, because he wanted to stay in the city where he truly built his identity. In 1903, he reportedly turned down an offer that would have significantly exceeded that salary he was getting from the Pirates, and he stayed.
And don't get it wrong, guys. Like, this is not normal behavior at any period in athletics, like the 1900s, the 1990s, like the 2020s. Athletes don't do this kind of thing. But Wagner, he could have extracted maximum value. Like, he had the leverage. He was the best player in the league and everybody else agreed with it, but he chose loyalty instead. Whether that was sentiment, comfort, or simply a guy who already had more money than he needed, it reinforced the image of a player who was fundamentally different.
Let's get specific about his actual methods, because Honus's approach to the game was genuinely unusual, and understanding it explains why his career probably lasted as long as it did.
Yeah, at the plate, Wagner hit from a wide open stance, very unconventional for his era. He choked up on the bat slightly, and he used his enormous wrists and hands to drive the ball to all fields. He was not what you would think of as a pull hitter. He used the entire field, which, when you can do that as a hitter, makes it almost impossible to position against, so like having a bias to pull a ball or hit it into a certain position on the field. And which is, it's just amazing when you think about the way this guy's hit.
Out on the base pass, he wasn't fast in like a straight line sense. He wasn't a sprinter necessarily, but he was fast in a baseball sense, meaning, he'd read situations brilliantly. He'd get great jumps. He stole 61 bases in 1907 at age 33. That's crazy, you guys. But it wasn't just athleticism that did that. It was his baseball IQ that had compounded over decades.
Defensively at shortstop, his arm was extraordinary, aided by those massive hands that could grip and fire from almost any angle. He played shallow by the standards of an era, which allowed him to take away singles that other shortstops conceded. His error rates, given his range, were considered exceptional.
And here's the thing about the dead ball baseball era that makes Wagner's career especially impressive, because the margins were tiny. Again, games were won by manufacturing runs. It's what we call today small ball, right? Stolen bases, sacrifice bunts, hit and run plays, moving runners through contact. Wagner was brilliant at all of that. He could bunt, he could hit and run, he could take a pitch when he needed to. He gave pitchers and managers nothing simple about having to work against this guy.
By his mid-30s, he had definitely slowed down physically. But like all the greats, you think of Tom Brady, Jordan, these guys that get later, LeBron's a great example of this. He adapted. He refined his plate discipline. He shortened his swing a little bit, leaned into all those mental advantages that he collected over the decades of playing baseball. He played into his early 40s, which is insane for the early 1900s. Most guys today don't play into their early 40s. But by that point, the game had become for him primarily a mental exercise, you guys, that his body had just enough left to take the rest of the way.
Honus finally retired after the 1917 season. He was 43. He had given professional baseball 22 years. What came next was not a quiet exit. It was a second career, as long as some players' entire first careers.
Yeah, he returned to Carnegie and ran a sporting goods store, remained connected to Pittsburgh's civic life. He's not a figure that like disappeared into comfort just because he was done playing ball. This guy was genuinely beloved. He's one of those athletes that transcends sports and becomes part of a city's entire identity. When people in Pittsburgh talked about Wagner in the 20s, they weren't talking about old baseball. Like they were talking about their neighbor.
And then in 1933, 16 years after his last game, the Pittsburgh Pirates brought him back to coach. He would remain with the organization until 1951. That's 18 years coaching after a career that had already spanned more than 2 decades. The man spent roughly 40 years in a baseball uniform.
In 1936, baseball's Hall of Fame held its inaugural election. 5 players received enough votes for the first ballot induction. Ty Cobb with 222 votes out of the 226 ballots. Babe Ruth and Honus Wagner tied at 215, and Christy Mathewson received 205. Walter Johnson received 189. Those 5 men, Wagner obviously being among them, became the foundation of baseball's entire historical identity.
It also reminds us that there's always been idiot voters in the Hall of Fame voting, always, from the very first ballot. That's crazy.
You said that so much nicer than I was going to say it, Bob. Like, it's just proof that the baseball writers who have been voting on the Hall of Fame have always had their head up their asses firmly. To think that there was 4 people that didn't vote Ty Cobb in, there was 11 people that didn't vote for Babe Ruth and Honus Wagner, and there was 21 people that didn't vote for Christy Mathewson. Absolutely ridiculous. Just completely ridiculous. The fact, though, that one thing I'll point out is that Wagner tied Babe Ruth. What did you think about that? He got the same amount of votes as Babe Ruth. See, like, when you think back to that era, everybody thinks of Babe Ruth, and they should. But it's worth pausing on the fact that they got the same number of votes. Ruth was the most famous athlete on the planet by a mile at this point. But the writers who voted clearly placed Wagner in exactly the same tier. Not behind Ruth. He was even with Ruth.
Honus Wagner died on April 6th, 1955. He was 81 years old. The city of Pittsburgh shut down. Like, it wasn't a formality. The city genuinely mourned his passing. There's a bronze statue of him to this day outside PNC Park, originally commissioned in 1955, that still stands as one of the most recognizable monuments in American sports.
The Flying Dutchman, the original complete player, the standard against everything that followed in the National League that was measured, that was Honus Wagner. Let's go into the future. August 2021, a piece of cardboard, roughly the size of a business card, printed between 1909 and 1911 by a tobacco company that no longer exists, featuring a player who died in 1955, sells at auction for $6.6 million. It does not set a world record because it had already been topped by itself.
That's right. Another copy of that card sold privately 2 years later for an estimated $7 million plus. Buyer's identity was not disclosed. The transaction was not announced through like an auction. It happened the way certain things tend to happen at the very top of any market, very quietly between people for whom the number is almost secondary to the actual acquisition.
Let's be precise about what that object actually is. It's a small printed card, roughly 1.5 inches by 2 5/8 inches. It is ink on paper, you guys. It's more than 110 years old. It has no utility. It generates no income. It can't be eaten. It can't be worn. It can't be driven.
I feel so judged by Bobs Rippin right now. Like, take a break, calm down. You don't belong here. This is Cardboard Wars. What are you talking? Wait. And yet it may be the single most economical, significant piece of sports memorabilia ever created, not because of what it is, but because of the story embedded in it. Today, we're going to trace the story from the printing press in 1909 to a multi-million-dollar auction room in 2021 and explain why this object holds the value that it does. To understand the T206 Wagner, you have to understand the business that created it. The American Tobacco Company was not a small regional firm. By the turn of the 20th century, it was one of the most powerful monopolies in American commercial history, controlling roughly 90% of the country's tobacco production. It was built by James B. Duke.
And Mr. Duke had used mechanized cigarette production to undercut his competitors throughout the 1880s and 1890s, acquiring or destroying them until he effectively stood alone. The ATC operated brands including Sweet, Caparel, Piedmont, Old Mill, Polar Bear, dozens of brands, all of which would appear on the back of these T206 cards.
The card series itself was just a promotional tool, right? It was a device to increase repeat purchases. The logic was pretty straightforward. It include collectible cards in cigarette packs, create sets that require multiple purchases to complete, and give consumers a reason to buy your brand specifically. And guys, it worked. Card sets have been driving tobacco sales since the 1880s already.
The T206 set, produced between 1909 and 1911, was the most ambitious version of the strategy the ATC had ever attempted. It featured over 500 individual subjects across dozens of different tobacco brands. The design was simple: a player portrait on the front, a brand advertisement on the back, and the printing volume was enormous.
Yeah, for most players in that set, tens of thousands, sometimes far more, of their cards entered into circulation. The common cards in T206 survived in quantities large enough that collectors can find them today in moderate condition, actually, without extraordinary difficulty or really even expense when you consider what you're buying. The system worked exactly as they designed it for 99% of the players included.
And it should surprise nobody that Honus Wagner was the exception. And the exception was not an accident of production. It was actually a decision made, or maybe forced, at some point during the print run. And that decision is the origin of everything that follows.
Here's what we know for certainty. Honus Wagner's T206 card entered limited production and then stopped. It was not fully distributed. The number of copies that reached the public was a fraction of what any comparable star player received. Something intervened.
Yeah, the two primary theories that have coexisted for decades, really over a century now, and neither of these can be fully confirmed because the relevant business records from the American Tobacco Company's internal communications did not survive in any form that settles the question definitively.
Here's theory one, Kevin. Okay. Theory one is, and this is the one that's been dominant in popular storytelling, we've probably heard this one more frequently, is that the tobacco objection, that Wagner was known to have concerns about the association between baseball and tobacco products, particularly their accessibility to kids. A 1912 account in the Sporting Life reported that Honus Wagner had demanded his cards be withdrawn because he did not want his likeness used to sell tobacco to young people.
Theory two is simpler and probably more consistent with how professional athletes have and do operate today. Money. Wagner had not been compensated for the use of his image. He found out his likeness was being printed and distributed as a commercial asset without his consent or payment, and he demanded either compensation or removal.
Yeah, the honest answer is that both theories could be true simultaneously, guys, and that the tobacco objection may have been like the public rationale, like when guys say it's not about the money after signing a record deal, while the compensation dispute was actual mechanism, right? So what matters for the story of the card, truthfully, doesn't matter. What matters is the outcome, because production ceased, distribution of this card stopped, and the number of Wagner cards that had already escaped into the market became fixed and finite.
There's one more detail that's kind of frequently underreported or left out. The withdrawal wasn't total. Some cards had already been distributed. They were already inside packs that had already been sold. The American Tobacco Company, Honus Wagner, they couldn't recall these cards. What was out was out. which means the scarcity of the T206 Wagner is not manufactured. It was structural. It can't even be reversed.
The structural scarcity is the foundation of everything, not nostalgia, not artistry, not the quality of the printing. The fact that at some point in 1909 or 1910, somebody said, hey, stop. And the stop was almost, but not entirely complete, is what created this economic trajectory of Honus's specific T206 card. Between roughly 1910 and 1970, the T206 Honus Wagner was not famous. It was not being tracked, graded, or discussed as a once-in-a-generation collectible. It was simply a rare card from an old set, the kind of thing that turned up occasionally in attic boxes, estate sales, and back rooms of antique shops.
Yeah, the sports card hobby as a modern collecting infrastructure didn't really exist yet. There were enthusiasts, certainly, people who had been quietly acquiring cards since the 30s and 40s. But the institutional framework of like grading companies, auction houses, price guides, investment grade collecting, that was still decades away.
Most T206 cards that survived to mid-century survived mostly by accident. They were tucked in shoe boxes, stored in drawers, forgotten at the back of closets. The ones that were cared for as collectibles in the 30s and 40s were cared for by people that really didn't have any idea of what they'd be worth decades later.
Today, PSA, probably the most prominent grading company in the hobby for now, has graded roughly 50 to 60 examples of the T206 Wagner. The total surviving population across all graded services and ungraded examples is estimated somewhere between 50 and 200, depending on how generously you can count lower grade fragments and trimmed copies.
That is an extraordinary small surviving universe for a card that was produced in what really should have been a substantial quality. Natural attrition, cards used as like toys, thrown away, lost to water and fire, damage, that accounts for part of it. But again, that's that limited initial print run. This is the dominant factor in the scarcity of this card.
I mean, that's the economic reality, right? It flows from those initial numbers. Like, there's no more of this card. There's no printing press that's going to give you a new one. There's no warehouse that we might run across, guys. Although, can you imagine, like, at some point they had to take all those cards that were left and like destroy them? Maybe somebody saved them. No. There's no warehouse of these things that are going to pop up later. What exists is essentially fixed. The supply is permanently constrained in a way that almost no other collectible can claim.
In 1985, a card dealer named Bill Mastro, one of the most respected and later most controversial figures in the hobby's history, acquired a near-mint T206 Wagner at a card show. Even then, a Wagner in that condition was extraordinary. He paid what at the time seemed like a serious sum.
Yeah, in 91, Mastro and his business partners, Rob Lifson, decided to sell. They weren't selling to a quiet buyer, though. They went to Wayne Gretzky, arguably the most famous athlete in North America at the time. Gretzky and his business partner, Bruce McNall, who owned the Kings, bought the card. And the sales price, fellas? $451,000.
For a baseball card. In 1991. Not just a transaction. This one was worthy of a press release. Gretzky gave the purchase tremendous visibility culturally, and the hobby press covered it accordingly, guys. Suddenly, people who'd never thought about the T206 set, they knew that the Wagner card existed and that it was worth $500,000.
That card was graded by PSA as an 8, near mint to mint. With an exceptional grade for a card of that age, it became known simply as the Gretzky Wagner. When Gretzky sold it in 1995, it went for $500,000 at a Christie's auction. The value was holding solid. Then,
in 2000, the card sold again. This breaks my heart to think about this time on eBay. And it was one of the most watched online auctions ever conducted in that point in the platform's history. The buyer was a Florida businessman named Brian Siegel. Sales price, this time, $1.265 million. The T206 Wagner became the first sports card to cross over $1 million.
For a piece of cardboard from 1909 or 1910.
You know, Bob, you keep calling it a piece of cardboard. We're going to have a problem, dude.
Seriously.
That sale didn't just move a card. It repositioned the entire concept of what sports collectibles could be worth. Every serious collector in the hobby recalibrated their thinking on that day.
In 2007, the Gretzky Wagner sold again, this time to Ken Kendrick, the managing general partner of the Arizona Diamondbacks, for $2.8 million through SCP Auctions. The card now lives inside a Major League Baseball organization, displayed in the Diamondbacks offices in Phoenix, that Kevin Rips and Ben Rippin, me, we got to see last week in Phoenix at the card show inside of the stadium. For an extra $25, we got to go down in the secret room and see 5 or 10 of the greatest cards we've ever seen.
You know, Ben, that was my second time ever seeing that exact same card. I'd seen it almost 10 years to the day previously. My uncle reminded me that last week when I saw him in Northern California. We were talking about seeing that card, and seeing that card is, man, it's something. But there's complication with the Gretzky Wagner story here, and one that the hobby has never fully resolved. Questions started to arise about whether the card's edges had been trimmed, a form of altercation that can artificially improve the condition of a card. PSA, which had originally graded it as an 8, later downgraded the card to a 5 with a qualifier notation.
Ooh, that downgrade kind of significant, right? A PSA 5 and a PSA 8 are not the same card in the market size, and trimming is considered a serious form of alteration in the hobby, akin to restoration in the art market. It changes what the card is. The controversy did not destroy the Gretzky Wagner's value, but it introduced some complexity, and in high value markets, complexity is never free.
The card's story, including the controversy, actually deepens the mythology. In a market driven by a narrative, even a complicated narrative that adds to the total weight of the object's history, the Gretzky Wagner had now been owned by one of sports' most iconic figures, sold publicly multiple times, broken records, created controversy, and landed in a major league front office. The accumulation of a story that is not accidental or incidental to its value. It's actually central. The Gretzky Wagner is the most famous single copy of a card, but it is not the only copy to have set records. In 2016, a copy known as the Jumbo Wagner sold for $3.12 million through Heritage Auctions.
The Jumbo Wagner gets its name from, it's going to shock everybody, its dimensions. See, it's slightly larger than the standard T206 card, a variation that makes it immediately identifiable and, in the eyes of certain collectors, uniquely desirable. Physical uniqueness in a market where rarity is already extreme adds another layer of differentiation.
Way better than those lame jumbo downtowns that they put in the Costco boxes, you guys.
I got one right here, guys. I literally, there. I got 2 right here. I don't know what to do with these things.
That Jumbo Wagner sold for $3.12 million in 2016. It was a new record at the time, eclipsing the Gretzky Wagner's 2007 sale. And then the pandemic era hobby boom changed the entire calculus of what sports cards could fetch.
In August of 2021, an SGC3 T206 Wagner sold through Robert Edward Auctions for $6.6 million. An SGC3 is a mid-grade, not low, not pristine, a card with visible wear, rounded corners, perhaps even a crease. In virtually any other context in the hobby, a mid-grade card sells for a fraction of the high-grade examples.
Yeah, but that logic does not apply with the Wagner card, because the market for the card, it's not necessarily the condition. It's not condition driven. Collectors aren't chasing perfection. They know that there's no such thing with this card. They're chasing the object itself. The T206 Honus Wagner at any grade is the T206 Honus Wagner. And $6.6 million confirm that the market understands this clearly.
Privately, the numbers have reportedly continued to move. An SGC2 example changed hands reportedly. This was not a public sale, for over $7 million. These are unconfirmed private transactions, but the directional message is clear, you guys. We are now in a market where a single copy of a specific baseball card in average condition is being valued comparable to institutional quality art.
So if you're a old-time card collecting nerd like us three, or you're newer to the hobby, and you've wondered the story of Honus Wagner or the Honus Wagner card, maybe this filled in some of the blanks for you. This card, it's not just rare. There are rare things that are worth nothing. It's not just old. There are old things that command no attention. It's not just associated with a famous player. There are famous players whose cards trade for $50. This card's important. It's important to the hobby, to collectors, to history, and in honoring the greatness of Honus Wagner, one of the greatest baseball players of all time, and definitely one of the greatest, most famous Pittsburgh Pirates players of all time. I can name a few of my favorite Pittsburgh Pirates people. It comes to mind for me, everybody: Honus, Paul Skeens, and of course, Livy Dunn.
I'll throw in Barry Bonds before he had his massive head. Barry Bonds, he was a great Pittsburgh Pirate back in the day.
Yeah, what about Bobby Bo, Andy Van Slyke? I know I'm showing my age here. Bill Matlock. Come on, there were some great Pittsburgh Pirates, but no doubt this is the cornerstone of that organization. This card is the cornerstone of the entire hobby. And I just want to say, Ben, you and I went downstairs at the card show at separate times last week. And I don't know what the experience was like for you, but for me, it was just like it was 10 years prior, where I was literally speechless first looking at the card because of all the things that we've just laid out over the last 40 whatever minutes we've been sharing about this man and this card. It's the thing. I've been hearing about this since I was a little kid. Like, I'm talking first, second grade.
I was going to say, Kevin, that's one of the very first, I don't know. I feel like this card made me dig in my grandma's basement. It made me think every old dusty rusty can that I saw might have a card sitting in it. Like, this card as a kid growing up in the 80s collecting cards was like the promise that you could find something valuable in the junk.
Yeah, no doubt.
There's one that just sold this year, February 21st, 2026, is the T206 white border Honus Wagner Sweet Caporal Shields Family Collection PSA 1, sold for $5 million. I don't know if you're sitting around and you got some grandparents with an attic or with some closets that nobody's been in for a long time, might be worth going out there and doing a little bit of digging, because that's basically where this last one was found. Thanks for giving Cardboard Wars a listen. Thanks for the reviews and the comments and the interaction. Please do us a favor, subscribe on YouTube, give us a review on whatever platform that you're listening to, and take the time to reach out to us on the socials. Bob Rippin, Kevin Rips, and Ben Ripping with a G at the end on the Instagram. And then maybe we'll even track you down and see you at one of the upcoming card shows.
Thanks for listening to Cardboard Wars on the Rippin Podcast Network. Don't forget to leave a rating and review, and check out rippin.com to get connected to what we have coming up. Find us on Instagram and let us know what you would like to hear about on a future episode of Cardboard Wars. Until next time, keep ripping.